Most people don't go to a party thinking it might be the last night of their life. They go to escape, to dance, and to feel alive. And that's exactly what the partygoers I'll be talking about today were doing. Hi, I'm your host, Mallory Faust, and this is This Again, the show where we ask why the worst disasters in history tend to come with an eerie sense of deja vu. Today's hindsight horror show is the party, or more specifically, the systems that throw a party, hype it up, pack the room, and forget to care what happens once the lights go down. We're talking about two tragedies that took place nearly 80 years apart. One at an upscale nightclub in Boston in 1942, and the other at a mega music festival in Houston in 2021. Different generations, different music, same deadly mistakes. Because when we ignore warning signs and put showmanship ahead of safety, things can go south fast. So let's rewind and let's get into it. It's November 28th, 1942 in Boston, Massachusetts, and it happens to be Thanksgiving weekend. The country is at war. Families are clinging to joy wherever they can find it, and soldiers home on leave were making the most of the time they had at home. Couples were dressed to the nines, ready to see and be seen. And if you were lucky or knew someone, you got into Cocoanut Grove. The Cocoanut Grove was the place to be in Boston, a swanky, tropical-themed nightclub just steps from the theater district. Mobsters rubbed elbows with mayors, politicians, military brass, and out-of-towners on expense accounts came for cocktails and the chaos. And if you were really lucky, you might spot a Hollywood star, like Buck Jones, the cowboy heartthrob on the silver screen, who happened to be in town and on a war bonds tour. Picture this. Palm fronds made of paper crepe, bamboo trim, satin-lined ceilings, a twinkling night sky painted above the main ballroom, a full orchestra, stage shows, white tablecloths, candles at every table. The whole place was meant to feel like an exotic escape. It oozed glamour, money, and exclusivity. But underneath all of that was a death trap. Here's what you wouldn't have seen unless you looked closely. Windows had been sealed to prevent people from sneaking in or out. Exit doors were either locked, bricked up, or hidden behind curtains. The club was only supposed to legally hold about 460 people. That night, there were over 1,000. And the entire place was basically one big fire hazard wrapped in glamour. Still, no one gave it a second thought, because it was Cocoanut Grove. You were just lucky to be there. Downstairs in the Melody Lounge, a dim tropical basement bar, a busboy named Stanley Tomaszewski was told to replace a light bulb that had gone out above a table. He couldn't see what he was doing, so he struck a match. This wasn't against the rules. There was no formal fire policy. People smoked freely indoors at that point. It was 1942. But the ceiling was covered in a decorative palm leaf soaked in nitrocellulose, a material more flammable than gasoline. The reason? Because it was meant to give a shimmering effect. Some speculate that the match ignited the leaves. Others have stated that the origin was ultimately unknown. Nevertheless, flames raced across the ceiling. Within seconds, the fire leapt up the stairwell to the main floor. Witnesses say that the room went dark. A few screamed, "Fire!" but most didn't believe it at first. Then the smell hit, and there was thick, toxic smoke. Lots of heat, and people started rushing toward the one entrance they knew, the revolving door. At this point, people surged forward. The revolving door jammed immediately. Bodies clogged it, unable to escape. Behind them, flames chased through the drapery, the false ceiling, and the flammable paint. It was like the air itself was on fire. Survivor Walter Kowalski later said, quote, "The smoke came in fast and black as tar. My wife was with me 1 minute, and the next, I couldn't find her. I couldn't breathe. I dropped to the floor and crawled." End quote. A Coast Guardsman who had been enjoying a drink 1 minute was now smashing glass with a chair, trying to force an exit. He and a few others escaped, but not many. People were trampled. Bodies were stacked 6 deep at locked exits. Tables were overturned. High heels were broken, coats were shed in panic, and some never even made it out of their seats. One survivor reported hearing a woman pray aloud, "God forgive me," before the room was overtaken by smoke. Another man, Richard McGuire, had just returned from active duty. He made it out, but not his date. He told a reporter later, quote, "You go to war and you expect to die. You go to a nightclub and you don't." End quote. The entire fire lasted just over 10 minutes. By the time firefighters arrived, the flames had already gutted the building. Smoke poured into the street, and what they found inside defied comprehension. Some victims were found with their faces turned toward the ceiling, mouths open in silent screams. Others clutched loved ones, and many were unrecognizable. Though initial headlines spun a heroic tale of Buck Jones rushing into the blaze to save others, the truth was quieter, less cinematic. He was found near his table, collapsed and horribly burned. There was no dramatic escape, no last stand, just a man likely overcome before he even knew what was happening. He was taken to Massachusetts General Hospital and died there 2 days later on November 30th, 1942. A temporary morgue was set up in the skating rink. Parents wandered the rows of covered bodies looking for their children. Doctors at Massachusetts General Hospital were treating over 100 severe burn cases with techniques that didn't even have names yet. One doctor famously wrote in his notes, quote, "We are inventing treatment by necessity," end quote. Among the victims were waiters, dancers, Harvard students, nurses, servicemen, and sweethearts. And here's the part that stings. This was preventable. On November 20th, 1942, just 8 days before the fire, Boston's Fire Prevention Bureau sent Lieutenant Frank Linney to inspect the Cocoanut Grove. His report? The premises were in, quote, good condition. But city records tell a different story. The club lacked valid licenses, had illegally locked exits, unauthorized renovations, and paper crepe over satin ceilings. None of it raised alarms because the owner, Barney Wilansky, had political cover. He reportedly boasted that fire codes didn't apply. Mayor Tobin would never let his club get shut down. Club owner Barney Wilansky was more than just a well-connected businessman. He was arrogant about it. He reportedly bragged that fire codes didn't apply to the Cocoanut Grove. Why? Because Mayor Tobin was his friend. Wilansky believed, and said out loud, that Tobin would never let the city shut his club down. After the fire, Wilansky was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 12 to 15 years in prison. But here's the part that will make your stomach turn. In 1946, just 3.5 years after the fire, Maurice Tobin, now governor of Massachusetts, pardoned Wilansky and released him from prison. Wilansky was dying of cancer by then, and the pardon was seen by some as an act of mercy, but to others, it felt like a final, cruel reminder that connections still mattered more than consequences. Now let's fast forward nearly 80 years, a different city and a different crowd, with a different soundtrack. We're in Houston, Texas now, November 5th, 2021, the opening day of Travis Scott's third Astroworld Festival. Now, if you're not familiar with Travis Scott, he's not just a rapper, he is a whole brand. He's known for wild performances, mosh pits, and energy that borders on dangerous. The chaos? That's part of the appeal. So when people say that this crowd was hyped, that's not an exaggeration. Fans were camping out, and many had flown in from out of state. People were bragging online about getting as close to the front as possible. The vibe wasn't just excitement, it was pure adrenaline. As the gates opened, videos showed fans rushing security lines, bulldozing barricades, and knocking over metal detectors. Some ducked under turnstiles, others simply trampled over each other to get in. Chaos was in motion. Within minutes, Houston officials from police, fire, and festival command recognized the escalating danger. According to logs, they determined the stage had been compromised and formally declared a mass casualty incident before the show even ended. But instead of pausing and reassessing, organizers pressed forward. By dusk, 50,000 people were packed, shoulder to shoulder, in front of the main stage. And if you've ever been in a tight crowd, like really tight, you know what this feels like. You're not just standing near people, you're part of a human wave. When Travis Scott took the stage at 9:02 p.m., the crowd surged forward. People started to fall. Others were pinned between bodies, unable to move their arms or breathe, and eyewitnesses later described being squeezed so tightly they felt their ribs might break, or gasping for air as mass compression squeezed all breath from their lungs. Parallels repeated in multiple post-event interviews. A young woman later identified as Sienna Faith McCurdy and a man, Aiden Cruz, climbed a camera platform and pleaded on camera for someone to stop the show. Despite video evidence of people dying below, the operator looked at them, shooed them off, and just kept filming. It's actually horrifying to watch that clip. People waved their arms, made hand signs, shouted for them to stop the show, and from the stage, it probably just looked like crowd energy. From the artist's perspective, things probably just looked wild, but normal. That's the problem. It looked normal because chaos was part of the brand. 10 people died and hundreds were injured. Ezra Blount was 9, the youngest victim, trampled while on his father's shoulders. Brianna Rodriguez was 16. She was a high school dancer from Houston. Jacob Juranek was 20, and he was a college student studying journalism and attending with his best friend. Franco Patino was 21, a mechanical engineering student, and he was known for helping others. Axel Acosta was 21, a computer science major, and had just turned 21 days before. Rodolfo Rudy Pina was 23. He was an aspiring model and a criminal justice major. Madison Dubisky was 23, a marketing professional and an Astros fan. Danish Baig, 27, died trying to save his fiancée. John Hilgert was 14, and he was a high school freshman who loved baseball and music. Bharti Shahani, 22, was a Texas A&M senior and died after several days in the ICU. As you can tell, most of the victims were in their teens or 20s. Some were just kids, and every one of them had plans, futures, families, and they're all still grieving. Many went into cardiac arrest due to compressive asphyxia. Now, they weren't burned or crushed in the traditional sense. They simply couldn't breathe because the pressure from the crowd was so severe. Emergency services were completely overwhelmed. Paramedics were understaffed and medical tents were confused about who was in charge. All the while, the music kept playing. Travis paused the show twice to acknowledge ambulances, but never fully stopped performing. Some fans say he didn't know what was going on. Others say the chaos was clear. A report later showed that city officials declared a mass casualty event at 9:38 p.m., but the concert didn't stop until 10:10 p.m. That's 32 minutes of ongoing performance while people were dying in the crowd. One survivor, a nurse named Madeline Eskins, passed out from lack of oxygen and had to be crowd surfed out to safety. When she came to, she begged medics to let her help. She told local news, quote, "It was like a war zone. I saw people who weren't breathing. No one was doing chest compressions. People were screaming and nobody could hear us," end quote. And just like Coconut Grove, the warnings came early. Travis Scott had previously been arrested for inciting crowds. In 2015, he told fans to jump security barricades at Lollapalooza. In 2017, he encouraged fans to bypass security at a New York show. One fan ended up paralyzed. So this wasn't out of nowhere. But the Astroworld brand was a moneymaker. There was sponsors, merch, streams, hype. And you could feel the reluctance from everyone, event organizers, the city, even fans, to not let it go on. There's this psychological pressure at events like this. You paid for it. You traveled. You dressed up. You told your friends. You want it to be worth it. It's like, what's the alternative? Admitting it's unsafe? Leaving early? No one wants to be the buzzkill. But the real buzzkill is the sound of someone screaming for help while no one moves. You'd think that after something like Coconut Grove, people would have learned, right? But here's the uncomfortable truth. People did learn. They just forgot, or didn't apply it, or thought, that could never happen here. It's not that no one cared, it's that no one wanted to be the one to ruin the party. At Coconut Grove, exit doors were locked because the owner didn't want people skipping out on bar tabs. He literally ordered staff to keep them shut. At Astroworld, pausing the show would have disrupted an entire business model. There were corporate sponsors, a global live stream, VIP wristbands, too many eyes, and too much money on the line. You could feel the weight of inertia in both places. The logic wasn't, no one will die, it was, let's not overreact. Let's not cause a scene. But safety is a scene worth causing. There's actually a term for this in disaster psychology: normalcy bias. According to a summary by the Yale School of Medicine, normalcy bias is what happens when our brains default to routine. Even in the face of obvious danger, we tell ourselves, this can't really be happening. We downplay the threat. We wait for confirmation, sometimes until it's too late. And you'll notice that when these things happen, people come out of the woodwork and are first in line to highlight the stupidity of the decision making. But honestly, it's not stupidity, it's programming. Your brain goes, this feels wrong, but maybe it's part of the show? Spoiler, it's never part of the show. The Yale report explains that bias isn't irrational, it's protective. Our brains crave patterns and familiarity. But in a disaster, that craving can turn deadly. We interpret warning signs through the lens of what's supposed to happen, not what is. In both cases, the people in power were more afraid of being wrong about a warning than they were of being responsible for a tragedy. And look, I get it. I don't want to seem like a fearmonger here. I've stayed at shows that felt sketchy. I've ignored that little knot in my stomach when I couldn't see the exits. I've rationalized too, so I'm not here to preach. I'm here to ask, why do we keep doing this? After Coconut Grove, the response was swift. Public outrage was enormous. Newspapers ran gruesome photos, and Massachusetts revised fire codes almost immediately. Revolving doors could no longer be the sole exit. Exit signs had to be visible and lit. Flammable decor was banned, and fire inspections were mandatory and enforceable. Fire safety as we know it today honestly owes much to that tragedy. Hospitals also used what they learned treating burn victims to improve care for World War II soldiers. Out of horrific loss came real change. Astroworld? Well, it's murkier there. Multiple lawsuits were filed, and Travis Scott settled some, and others are still pending. The Houston police released a report, but no one has faced criminal charges. Festival safety conversations happened for a bit, and then the industry seems to have just kept moving. Travis is still performing. In fact, he headlined a massive festival in 2023, just 2 years after Astroworld. So, what's the difference? Some of it is systemic. Coconut Grove happened in an era where local government had a lot more control. Astroworld sits at the nexus of global entertainment, celebrity, corporate sponsorship, and social media hype. Accountability gets blurred there. But some of it's psychological. We're good at reacting to horror briefly. But sustained reform? It's hard when the machine just keeps rolling. So what's the difference? Coconut Grove changed building codes. Astroworld changed PR teams. But this wasn't the first time people died in a crowd, and it won't be the last. This is a pattern. You can trace it through history, like scorch marks. Like in Cincinnati in 1979, The Who was performing at Riverfront Coliseum. It was general admission, meaning first come, first served. The band started their sound check late, though, and fans outside thought the concert had already begun. They surged towards the door. Security was not prepared, and the doors weren't clearly labeled. There weren't enough open entry points at the end of the day, and 11 people were crushed to death, all before the concert had even officially started. And the wildest part, the band kept playing, not because they were heartless, but because no one told them what had happened. They didn't find out until after the show ended. Sound familiar? And then there's the event that happened in West Warwick, Rhode Island in 2003 at the Station nightclub. It was a small venue and maybe about 400 people packed inside to hear a local show by the band Great White. The band used indoor pyrotechnics. Sparks hit the foam soundproofing above the stage, and within seconds, fire climbed the walls and rolled across the ceiling like napalm. The whole club was engulfed in 90 seconds. People rushed to the front door, the same one that they came in, creating a human bottleneck. Other exits were blocked. Ultimately, 100 people died. And here's the kicker: a local news crew happened to be filming that night, doing a segment on nightclub safety. Their footage captured the entire disaster, from the first spark to the last scream. So no one could claim they didn't know. No one could say it was unpredictable. And then there's the incident at a soccer stadium in Sheffield, England in 1989. Fans were crushed against steel barriers after police allowed too many people in a standing room only section. The officers didn't stop the game, didn't open the emergency gates. They assumed the crowd surge was due to unruly fans. It wasn't. It was just mismanagement. Ultimately, 97 people died, and for years, decades, authorities blamed the victims. The narrative was the fans were drunk, the fans were violent, the fans caused it. Only after an independent inquiry, years later, did the truth actually come out. Police control failed. The crowd was actually peaceful. The victims were innocent. That's the other side of this story. It's not just that people die in crowds, it's that institutions almost always choose to blame the crowd. So here's the through line between these tragedies. Everyone was waiting for someone else to stop the music. At Coconut Grove, the fire inspectors didn't want to challenge the club's ownership. At Astroworld, security staff didn't want to challenge the production team. And even the artists didn't want to disappoint the fans. The result? Mothers, brothers, college kids lost their lives while just trying to enjoy a night out. It's heartbreaking, and even more so, it's maddening. And honestly, it's unfortunately very human. So, if the story is the same, why isn't the outcome? That's the part I keep coming back to. Coconut Grove changed laws. It led to sweeping reforms in building codes, fire safety, emergency exits, and occupancy limits across the country. It actually reshaped how cities were built. In Astroworld, there were lawsuits, settlements, and PR statements, but the festival circuit just kept going. Why? Maybe it was the timing. Coconut Grove happened in 1942 when America was at war. The victims were civilians. There was a hunger to assign meaning, a sense that this could never be allowed to happen again. Astroworld happened in 2021, and we were already burned out from tragedy. There was the pandemic, political division, social unrest. Maybe there wasn't enough oxygen left for outrage. Or maybe it's about who gets hurt. Coconut Grove's victims were mostly white, working class, and middle class adults. Astroworlds were mostly young, brown, black teens and fans. And in this country, that changes how fast people are believed, how much grief is given room. Or maybe it's just the speed of culture now. The station fire happened in 2003. 100 people died, and we're still talking about it. Astroworld faded in weeks. Attention is currency, and tragedy, if it's not caught in the right filter or trending at the right moment, just slips through the cracks. Maybe we're just better at optics and worse at accountability. But culture is only half the story. The other half lives in our heads, in the quiet calculations we make about who we're willing to hold accountable. And that's where Astroworld feels different, because the blame wasn't just aimed at a faceless system. It hovered around a celebrity, someone people loved, someone woven into their playlists and their sense of identity. And that changes the psychology completely. One of the most fascinating parts of this comparison isn't just the fires or the crowds or even the mechanics of what went wrong. It's how the public reacted afterward, and how wildly different those reactions were. In 1942, with Coconut Grove, outrage had a clear target. The club was a fire trap. Windows were sealed shut, Exits were hidden, occupancy doubled, and flammable decorations were everywhere. The public didn't have to squint to know who was responsible. It was obviously the club owner and the city officials who looked the other way, the inspectors who didn't enforce the rules. It was easy, psychologically, to get angry, to demand justice, to demand reform. You could blame the machine, meaning the faceless government, the bureaucrats, the corrupt business owners, and that's something people are pretty comfortable with. We almost like blaming institutions. It feels good in a dark way to point to the system and say, you failed us. Because the system is impersonal. You don't have brunch with the mayor. You don't dance to the fire inspector's latest album. You don't wear a t shirt with the city council's face on it. When government screws up, outrage comes easily. Astroworld was trickier. Who do you blame when the face of the tragedy is someone you like, someone you follow on Instagram, someone who headlined your Spotify playlist, someone who feels like a friend? That's where the psychology gets messy because blaming a celebrity is inconvenient. It risks puncturing the little parasocial bond you've built, the one where you know every lyric, where you feel like their success is your success, where liking them has become part of your identity. And our brains are very good at protecting our identities. It's the same mental gymnastics people go through when their favorite politician or actor or athlete gets caught doing something awful. Instead of adjusting our opinion, we bend the facts. We say the reports were exaggerated. We say the critics are just jealous. We say, okay, maybe they made mistakes, but haven't we all? Because admitting otherwise means rewriting the story we tell ourselves about the person, and by extension, about ourselves. This is cognitive dissonance in action. The two truths are colliding. I love this celebrity, and this celebrity might be responsible for harm. And instead of holding both, we take the easier path, which is protecting the first truth and downplaying the second. You saw this at Astroworld. Some fans were quick to defend Travis Scott, arguing he couldn't possibly have known the crowd was in trouble, or that it wasn't his job to stop the show. Others blamed the city or the venue or a few bad actors. The outrage was real, but it was fragmented and diluted. It didn't have the same unified punch as the outrage after Coconut Grove. And here's where modern fandom makes it even more complicated. Social media has created what psychologists call parasocial relationships, one sided bonds where we feel like we know a celebrity personally, even though the relationship only goes one way. In some cases, fans defend their idol so fiercely that criticism feels like a personal attack. And this isn't new. Beatlemania had shades of it, but online culture supercharges it. To blame Travis Scott wasn't just a question of performer. For some fans, it felt like questioning themselves. Contrast that with 1942. No one was out there with a free Coconut Grove sign. No one was rushing to defend the nightclub owner because they had posters of him on their wall. The outrage was clean, direct, and laser focused. And maybe that's the scarier echo. When the system fails, we demand change. But when the person we love fails, we often bend over backwards to let them off the hook. Not because the facts are unclear, but because accountability is inconvenient. Because it asks us to risk our comfort, to risk our playlists, to risk our own little identity narratives. And in the end, that's how history gets the space to repeat itself. Not just because governments or corporations cut corners, but because we let certain stories slide. Because we find it easier to forgive or ignore when the culprit is someone we'd rather keep on a pedestal. I'll leave you with this. We all want to be cool, right? We all want to be part of something. We want to say that I was there, not I left early. But history is full of people who didn't leave early and didn't come home. So next time you're at a concert or a club and something feels off, I would listen to that little voice. Look for the exits. Step away if it gets too tight. Don't let the crowd decide for you. And if you have to be the one to raise the alarm to say, hey, something's not right here, good. Be the buzzkill. Be the one who ruins the vibe, especially if it means someone else survives the night. If we don't remember what it feels like when people die at a party, we're not just doomed to repeat it, we're scheduling the sequel. Thanks for listening to this again. And while I still have you, make sure to subscribe and send this to a friend who likes to plan events. I'll see you next time.